A game with an actual American release. That's right, Arnold Schwarzenegger with a boomerang. This episode, Obscure Old Games. This is exactly the type of game I envisioned when I started making this show. The B tier of classic consoles, the overlooked, the under-remembered. And this game fits that bill perfectly. It's Taito's Power Blade for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Like most memorable NES titles, this one starts life in Japan. In 1990, Natsume developed Power Blazer for Taito to publish on the Famicom. The game was pretty blatant in its aspirations to be Mega Man, right down to the main character being a robot midget in a helmet.
Now, I've never played Power Blazer, but by all accounts it isn't very good. It's very linear, yet extremely difficult, and your little not-so-Mega Man is cumbersome, hard to control, and has weak attacks. So, leave it to the man behind Captain N the Game Master, who by this point was working in Taito's US office, to awesome up this game.
And awesome it up he did. He expanded the levels, added additional goals, and most importantly, made the main character into Arnold Schwarzenegger with access to RoboCop's suit. And it's this game, Power Blade, that was released in the US in March of 1991.
Now, in spite of being well reviewed at the time, and even getting a Nintendo Power cover, this game is not that well remembered by many. I have no idea why. The game is eminently playable, it's briskly paced, and it has enough unique mechanics to stand out in a sea of Me Too NES action side-scrollers.
At its core, the game is still more or less a Mega Man clone, but don't let that turn you off. I would play Power Blade over Mega Man 4, 5, or 6 any day. When you start, you get to choose one of 6 stages. You see, the master computer that runs this future utopia come dystopia has gone wacky, and it's up to the Nova, to take his super awesome boomerang, recover the 6 access codes, and gain entry to the central computer to set things right. So you can choose any stage, but it doesn't really matter because unlike Mega Man, you don't get anything for beating any of the stages. So the idea of choosing the right order to have the right tools for the next challenge kinda goes out the window. Still, it provides an opportunity for some variety from playthrough to playthrough. In each stage, you have a contact that you need to find, who will give you a key card to access the boss room. The bosses guard the magical MacGuffins that prevent you from accessing the mainframe, the master computer. The game has a pretty good amount of story for a console game of its vintage, but ultimately who cares? It's just window dressing to provide an excuse to boomerang some dudes to death.
Well, that is until you get the power suit. Remember what I said before about the RoboCop armor? Yeah, well, there are certain power-ups in this game that take Nova from being a badass with a boomerang to being a badass in cybernetic armor.
Hell yes, that is one stone badass. Now you do have to be careful with these as you only get 3 hits before you go back to normal Nova. And these don't respawn if you lose a life, so don't waste them. On the positive side, if you find your contact and then die before reaching the boss room, you also keep the card key, so the death mechanic goes both ways. And this is important, since the stages are non-linear and you can find yourself going in a big circle before you find your contact. This sounds like it could be annoying, but the levels are really designed to be just the right size, where it's not too easy to find your contact in the boss room, but they're also not so sprawling that you get lost and therefore frustrated.
And that is what this game does really well and why it's still so fun and playable today. It hits that sweet spot of being really fun and really satisfying without being too difficult. I mean, sure, it probably errs on the side of being maybe a little too easy in some ways, mostly having to do with Nova being really overpowered compared to the enemies, but you're also hearing this from someone who loves ghouls and ghosts, so I'm probably not a good source. For the average game player, it's probably pretty well balanced in terms of difficulty.
The only real criticism I have of the game is that Nova's jump seems a little too short. There are several jumps where if you aren't holding down the A button until the second you plant your feet, you'll fall short. And even worse, in several of these situations, if you don't jump at the last possible instant, even if you hold the A button all the way through the jump, you'll still fall to your death. Though by all accounts, his jump is much improved over the jump mechanics in the Japanese original.
But even with that small caveat, this is still a fantastic game, and I recommend it to any NES player, especially if you've had your fill of Mega Men, Marios, Castlevanias, and Ninja Gaidens. Alright, so there also was a sequel which I feel I should address. Now, I've never played it, but again, I've heard it's not as bad as Power Blazer, but it's also not nearly as good as Power Blade. The other problem is it's one of Taito's later NES games, which means it's going to cost you a pretty penny because they didn't release many of those. It's not as rare as, say, Little Samson or Flintstone's Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, but you're still looking at upwards of $100 for a game that, again, by all accounts, isn't that great. Power Blade can be had for about $5, so you should definitely check that one out. Okay. Well, that's it for this episode. Make sure that in the interim, between now and our next episode, you check out GameFear.com, you check out OnTheStick.com for all kinds of awesome content, and come back next time for another obscure, old game.